We here at Republic have been following what's been going on with the Hamas, with the Hezbollah, and Israel's fight very, very closely. We empathize with the Israelis. We are clear about the position our network takes on these issues. We are against all Islamist forces, and therefore there's a lot in common that we do have. Reuven, thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnab, for having me.
Okay, so this is a great opportunity for me to try and understand what's going on in the Middle East, obviously, but now there's a new lens. Donald Trump has just taken over his second term. Right. So let me start with a broad question. What do you think the Trump presidency 2.0 will bring to the Middle East, and specifically for your country?
Well, we are looking at the second Trump administration with great hope because we've seen what the first Trump administration brought to our region. The Abraham Accords, the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the recognition of the Golan Heights as part of Israel, the transfer of Israel from EUCOM to CENTCOM, which allows more coordination on military and defense issues within the area of the Middle East. So we are waiting to re-engage in the process of expanding the Abraham Accords, of having a stronger stance of pressure against the Iranian aspirations for nuclear weapons and for hegemony in the region, in order to get rid of this ring of fire that Iran was trying to put around us. We already started doing that by our military operations. But I think that an American strong approach of pressure against Iran would be very conducive for the peace efforts in the region.
Now, countries that want to work together will work together, but there are always forces that do not want development, do not want peace, right. Do not want cooperation. And in fact, last time, if I'm not mistaken, it was within a week or 10 days of the formal conversation around the India-Middle East corridor that you had the attacks,
right.
October 7th attacks.
That's right.
Do you see those two things as linked? Do you feel that there are forces globally who would not want something like the IMEC to happen, who don't want stronger cooperation on trade and economic interests, who would create trouble, provoke trouble?
Yeah, no doubt. I think that probably the people that, the terrorists that initiated the terrible massacre on the 7th of October, that really shocked the world with the level of atrocity in terms of violence, of rape, mutilation. They wanted to shock the world. They wanted to create a situation in which they will keep decent people out of this area, out of the area of the Middle East. What the radical Islamic forces want to achieve is a situation in which they are the only rulers, and that their way of life, their medieval way of life, wins the day. And therefore they want to get rid of progress, they want to get rid of powers from outside that will come and develop the area, because they are competing against the pragmatic forces in the Arab world. So the fact that we were actually getting more close to our neighbors, that we were doing projects that would bring prosperity and stability, it was a threat for them. So they wanted to stop that. And to a certain extent, they achieved that. However, our determination to get rid of this suffocation, our determination to, fight, has created a situation which now we are in a new Middle East. Look what happened in Lebanon.
Are you really a new Middle East? You think you are a new Middle East? Because I personally believe that this fight with Islamist forces is not a.
It's not over. Of course, it's
certainly not over.
It's not over.
Yes.
But take a look what happened
to them.
Yes. Nasrallah made a huge miscalculation. He thought that he could intimidate Israel, that Israel would cave in. But he's no longer in Lebanon. There is a new president in Lebanon. Can you imagine that this president would be elected if Nasrallah would have been alive? Could you imagine that Assad regime would fall if Assad would be alive? So the fact that Israel gave this severe blow to the Iranian proxies, and actually to Iran itself, because we have targeted Iran itself, Iran understood it is exposed. It lost very major assets it had in the region, not all the assets. They are still very dangerous. They are still aspiring to get a nuclear weapon. They are still behind a lot of the radical forces, including in Yemen. And don't forget that they're not the only radicals. You have the Shiite radicals and you have the Sunni radicals. So we are here fighting against forces that are part of a wave of radicalism that is ramping up in the region, in our part of the world, in your part of the world, and we have to find ways to fight it effectively, by the way, not only militarily, but also politically, and also with soft tools. It's a historic confrontation, historic fight that we have to win.
But so many people have died. 800 plus Israeli soldiers have died. Thousands have been injured. 1,200 people were killed on the October 7th attacks. 251 people were taken hostages. 98 till recently were still hostage. And now 33 are out. You still have 63, 64 hostages in. Now, if you look at the toll that this has taken, and what you're telling me is that look at the achievements that we have struck. Yes, you have eliminated Hassan Nasrallah. You have eliminated Yahya Sinwar. He was the chief architect of the attacks. You have eliminated the top Hezbollah leadership. You've struck a blow psychologically at them. But it's not over. And I wanted to ask you here, Ambassador, do you really believe this sort of agreement that has been struck is a real agreement, or is it just being done under Donald Trump's pressure? I mean, is this an agreement cannot be bandaged? A ceasefire cannot be for 62 days. It has to last. Can this last?
Yeah, we knew at the outset that we will have to deal with this dilemma. That on the one hand, we want to bring our hostages back home safely, and on the other hand, we are determined to defeat Hamas and make sure it doesn't rearm and regroup. These two aims are, to a certain extent, contradicted, because if we could have militarily rescued all our hostages, then it would be maybe easier to get rid of Hamas completely.
Why couldn't you? Do you see that as a failure?
Because militarily, it's very difficult to get hostages from within a very condensed population of 2 million people. So we have attempted to rescue them militarily. Some of them we succeeded. There was one incident, for example, in which we tried to make a rescue, and as a result, 6 hostages have died. So we have to be very careful, because we have this value of bringing back hostages. We don't want to cause their death. So it's a let's say a playground that you have to deal with very carefully. This path that was agreed upon in May was very difficult to carry through. Why? Because the demand of Hamas was that in return for hostages, we will completely surrender. And we said, no, the first phase is a juncture. We're giving a chance, first, to bring back part of the hostages, and second, to create a situation in which pressure can be put on Hamas to renounce power in the Gaza Strip. But if they don't do that, and I'm not very optimistic that we'll do, we have the possibility under the agreement to renew hostilities, to continue our fight against Hamas. Because the last thing we want to do is create a situation in which Hamas can rearm, regroup, and do again a 7th of October, which, by the way, they declared they want to do again. So I think we have reached consensus with our American friends, both the outgoing administration and the ingoing administration, that this path that we agreed upon is the right path. This juncture is the right juncture. But the Trump administration, the incoming, was very clear that they are also against Hamas ruling the Gaza Strip. So this idea that was, transferred in some of the media outlets that actually Prime Minister Netanyahu had to surrender to Trump. No, it's not true.
No, that's true. The extreme right groups in Israel are pushing that.
Well, there are different opinions
within Israel. So there are groups within Israel who are looking upon this as some kind of a compromise. They do not want to middle path.
Of course, it was a compromise. Because it's a compromise
won't those groups overrule your government?
It's a compromise because it's a way of dealing with a dilemma I told you before. There are some groups in Israel that are saying, it's a legitimate way of thinking, by the way, that the lives of the hostages, it's not that they are not worth, but there are some prices that we as Israel as a nation, cannot pay in return of the hostages. And that the blood that was spilled in the fight against Hamas will have to be re-spilled as a result of the compromise we did. To a certain extent, they are right, because it is true that we have withdrawn partially from some parts of the Gaza Strip that we may have to take again. And that will cost soldiers' lives. So there are different ways of looking at it. At the end of the day, it's not an easy call, but the leadership of Israel has to measure all the considerations, both internal and external, and make a decision. That's the decision the government took. It's a legitimate decision. It's based on the legitimacy of a democratically elected government. And as you know, we are a coalition government. So some parts of the coalition may decide they no longer want to be part of this thinking. That's legitimate. But that's the situation, the political situation right now, and that's the deal that we are following.
That you're living with. Let me go back to the earlier question where I asked you, did you think that the IMEC announcement and the October 7th incident were linked? Because, you know, there is a business, trade and economic base of this cooperation. And in the previous administration, the Biden administration, you had the I2U2 agreement, you know, India, Israel, UAE and US. That has not really progressed as much as it could have, but there is potential there.
Right.
India is very deep with the global south. Israel is not so deep with the global south, but through India, a deeper relationship can be formed with the global south. So there's a strong alternative, how would I phrase it, an economic mini-lateral that's emerging between India, Israel, the United States, and the UAE, and other associated regional partners in the region. Is this going to be seen as a threat by other alternative global poles? For example, by China. I mean, they would, and they have incredible amount of influence over Iran. Right? So I do not see this, and I always wanted to push this question to someone like yourself. Do you really believe these incidents are isolated? I believe they're not. I believe that in the grand strategy of things, it's in the interest of many global forces to keep the Middle East burning, to keep Israel on the back foot, so that the Americans can get involved. However, you have a fairly insulationist approach of Donald Trump. So I just wanted you to tell all our viewers, how do you see this progressing?
Yeah.
You know, how do you see the next 5 years firming up?
You raised many points. I'll try to answer them briefly.
Okay.
So
Did I make my point clearly enough?
I think,
You're right.
I think it's clear. Look, I don't think that the Hamas decision to launch the 7th of October attack was directly linked with IMEC.
No.
Particularly, because probably there were a set of considerations they were considering, and I think you would be right to think that they really wanted to reverse the general course of the achievements we were having with the region, because they felt that their cause is being neglected. Okay.
Correct.
So in that context, IMEC was part of a general trend of countries that want to cooperate in order to prosper. So that's the answer on the first one. Regarding the Global South, Israel is very connected to the Global South. The only issue is that because Israel is isolated in the multilateral arena, because we are outnumbered in the multilateral arena, so there we are not part of different schemes of the Global South. But on a bilateral basis, Israel is playing an amazing role in Africa and Latin America, in Asia, because we have the technology that we are sharing with these countries, whether it be in communications. I'll give an example in Africa. At some point I was dealing with Africa in the ministry. I found out that there are dozens of Israeli companies that actually help Africa to jump to the digital age with cellular technology. Okay, because many of these countries didn't have cables, or the cables were stolen. So there were technologies that were helping these countries to create communication systems without the need of installing vast infrastructure. Not to mention our solutions on food security, on irrigation. So Israel is very popular in the countries of the Global South. And the same solutions we are having to those places are solutions that are relevant for other countries as well. So at the end of the day, I think the test is very simple. Either you manage to deal with the radicals and keep them in the box, and then you can do, cooperation, or you turn your back to the other side, and then they will come hunting you. So if I have to look in retrospective, in criticism towards ourselves, I would say, look, the fact that Hamas grew to the extent it grew in the Gaza Strip during 17 years without us dealing with that, we paid the price for that on the 7th of October. So the question is whether these people are going to be allowed to build that capacity again.
Can they not build their capacity again? I, for one, believe that this is not something that will end with the ceasefire, because Trump said all hell will break loose if the Middle East, the ceasefire is not reached by my oath-taking. And that was a major, major motivation behind Hamas agreeing to the deal. But Hamas could just be taking a strategic 2 steps back, 1 step forward strategy. It just...
So there's a difference between countries and terrorist organizations.
My point is you can't trust these groups.
Of course.
You can't.
There is a difference between countries and terrorist organizations. When you build a strong military, like the military President Trump wants to build, like the one he built during his first tenure, you can deter with that countries. But when it comes to hostile countries, but when it comes to terrorist organizations, it's very difficult to deter them because they are not afraid of paying a price, paying with human lives. And you saw it in the Gaza Strip, how Hamas was using human shields. And they were saying publicly that they don't mind, spending the lives of millions of Palestinians for their cause.
So how do you deal with them? How do you
need
talk to them?
Be more forceful in eradicating their military capabilities and keeping the guard.
How do you trust them? It is like saying...
Not to allow them to rearm.
Sorry to interrupt. How do you trust this? Because for my viewers, I'm always putting this back in an Indian context. If someone were to tell the government of India, go there into Pakistan or on third party and have talks with the Lashkar-e-Toiba, have talks with the Jaish-e-Mohammed, there would be chaos in India. First, there would be political pressure against it. And people would say, how can you deal with irrational actors rationally? So I've been a student of these terrorist groups. I, in fact, wrote a book about it in 2001.
Right.
I want you to just tell me the mentality, because we admire the Israeli mentality. I personally do. I love the fact that you do not compromise, and I do not like to see the Israelis compromising on anything, because whenever I do my programs, I say we have an Israeli approach, which is, take no hostages approach. Now, just 2 days before the ceasefire deal was reached, Trump's Middle East envoy, I think Steve Witkoff, he met Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And after the meeting with Steve Witkoff, Netanyahu dispatched this high-level delegation, which included the head of Mossad, to Qatar for advanced talks to return hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza. Now, I wonder in what atmosphere these talks happen. How do you sit with a terrorist group or their representatives and have talks? Is there a written agreement behind it? And what is the leverage that you hold on them? Okay. What is the leverage you hold on them should they not stand by their own agreement?
So first of all, the reason we didn't have the agreement so far is because Hamas was refusing to accept our demands. Number one, that the war will end, which we didn't accept. Number two, that we will withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Gaza and Egypt, which we refused.
Yeah.
In the first phase, in the first 42 days. They wanted to release only 10 to 12 hostages. We were stubborn to get a bigger number. So after our demands were met, that's the only time when our Prime Minister agreed to send a delegation. It wasn't because Witkoff asked it. It was because Hamas backed off, and they backed off. Maybe one of the reasons that they backed off is because of the threat of President Trump. Okay? So what we are having here is a situation in which we are working together with the United States. We are on the same side.
Are you completely working together with the United States?
Absolutely.
Is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump exactly on the same page, on the same side?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you more than that. Look, with many administrations, we had differences. We always found a way to bridge over our differences and at the end of the day, have a common approach. And this is what happened, even during the Biden administration. You know, it's not a secret that they withheld some of the weapons shipments. But at the end of the day, we managed to reach, you know, to overcome the differences and the shipments were made. So Israel and the United States are very close allies. It doesn't mean that we always have the same interests or we have the same opinions, but we always find a way to bridge over those differences, and I think that this will be the case with the Trump administration.
There's no differences between the two individuals?
No.
None at all?
Not on this issue.
All this Twitter speculation and all that?
No. I think, you know, people are looking at this very meticulously because, first of all, the relationship with the United States is very important for us. And people, because we are so close, people always are looking at these differences, you see. But at the end of the day, the dynamic was very clear. Only after Hamas backed off and agreed to the terms, we managed to get to this juncture, which includes the first phase. And after 42 days, if they don't agree to our demands, we will have the possibility to renew.
But what this
hostilities.
also tells me is that you have a very practical approach. You are having hostilities, you are eliminating the Hamas leadership. At the same time, you have back-channel conversations that are going on.
Well, the conversations are not direct.
Stealthy conversations.
Hamas is an organization that has sworn to destroy the state of Israel. They refuse to talk to us. So the negotiations are with the mediators. The mediators are the ones that are sending the messages to Hamas, okay? So if we would, look, you said that Israel is very uncompromising. We are very pragmatic, okay? Because, you know, when you need to survive in a challenging area like we have, you need to be practical and understand when you need to use power and when you need to use diplomacy. Because the price of being blind to opportunities means that you're going to pay a dear price for your mistakes. There are countries that can do many mistakes. They don't pay a price for it because they live in an environment that is very safe. The United States has 2 oceans defending it. They have Canada as a neighbor, okay? We are a tiny state in a very tumultuous area with many radical forces around us that want to destroy us. So we pay for any mistake that we do. And therefore, we have to be very careful. And we have to be, with open eyes, very pragmatic. Very stubborn, but very, very, very pragmatic as well.
You have more than amply displayed your ability to use force. You know, the pager bombs, the walkie-talkie bombs, that's really advanced stuff. And I think also you showed the patience not to use those bombs, though you had them, and the technology and the bombs within the pagers for many, many years before they were actually used.
The challenge in the fight against terrorism, what is the challenge? The challenge is that you fight against people that don't respect human norms. They violate any law, any value in the book, any achievements of humanity to create rules of engagement. They abuse it. They hide their military capabilities in hospitals. They hide inside ambulances. They use children as human shields. They do terrible atrocities. So, if you continue fighting by the book, and you are not creative in the way that you tackle them, you're going to lose for sure. So, the challenge is how to remain, sticking to your values on the one hand, but then being creative enough and sophisticated enough to be able to surprise them in ways that they didn't expect. And this, I think, was the great achievement in this confrontation with Iran and with Hezbollah.
So when Trump said all hell will break loose, what would it amount to? I just wonder. If it were to be, if that statement were to come into effect, which it could have, because you're making an open statement, if you don't achieve a compromise by the day I'm sworn in by 20th, all hell will break loose. What would that have meant in real terms?
I don't know exactly what he meant, but I can guess.
Yeah, what would it be?
there were limitations put on Israel during this confrontation. Some of the limitations we put, upon ourselves because we fight according to values and we do not indiscriminately, fire at civilians, for example. Okay, and there are some limitations that were coming from the United States when it comes to the capability of the facilitation of humanitarian aid, for example, that was entering into the Gaza Strip. So I imagine that under a massive military operation, if we would have launched it, because don't forget that now, when we have a ceasefire in Lebanon, we have more forces available to deal with the Gaza Strip. So theoretically, we could invade the Gaza Strip with much stronger force in a very short period of time, without taking into account temporarily the humanitarian aspect, only after victory, for example. Okay, so I think that maybe what Trump meant is that he would have allowed that. He would have actually blessed that effort, because everybody wants to get rid of the terrorists. It's not just an Israeli interest; it's also an American interest.
No, I understand, but what would it have amounted to?
Well, look, I'm not.
Is it possible to? Okay, so is it?
I'm not a tactician. At the end of the day, military tactics and strategy are something that is very complicated.
I agree, but at the same time, do you believe you believe you've served in the Israeli army? Do you believe that it's possible to take over, even theoretically, take over the Gaza Strip? Because urban terrorism is very different, as you've yourself acknowledged, the way they hide, and the local sentiment, and is it really possible, Ambassador?
It's a matter of price.
It's a matter of
price. What is the price you are willing to pay in order to achieve the military goal you have set? And whether that military goal you have set concurs with the political decision made by the government. So we have a political decision that is very clear. What the Israeli government, the Israeli cabinet asked our IDF to do is to bring the hostages back and to completely neutralize the Hamas military threat and make sure they don't rearm and regroup. Okay? That's the aim. Now the question is, what are the military and political tools you have in order to implement that policy? And whether you can succeed in implementing that policy. So part of that aspect is completely military. So what the IDF did is mainly raids into Gaza. It didn't enter with an occupation army to take completely over and take over responsibility on the civilian life in Gaza. Some of the right-wing parties in Israel were demanding that.
Can you do that?
Of course we can do
Does Israel have the capacity
to do that? The question is whether we have the interest of doing that. Because many people in Israel, including political parties, they don't believe that it is our role to control 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And that maybe we can create alternatives for that. Now the question is whether this thinking is aspirational and completely impossible to implement.
Yeah.
And if it is impossible to implement, if it's impossible to bring international players and other Palestinians that will actually take over, then maybe the conclusion will be that we don't have any other choice but to take the Gaza Strip ourselves completely. So this is a decision the cabinet...
Is it possible to do in Trump presidency 2.0? Because Trump talks about the potential of doing some quote-unquote beautiful things, unquote, in Gaza. What could those beautiful things be? I mean, I personally think that's it's a little bit of a fantasy land, if you don't mind my saying it. You can't end terrorism with pure economics or investment. It's not a business transaction.
We saw that. We tried that. We've been there.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
You felt you made mistakes when you tried to do that?
Of course. So we have to learn our history lessons. We have to learn from our mistakes. I think that at the end of the day, if Hamas will not renounce power in the Gaza Strip and it will stay determined not to share power and not to cooperate with the attempt of the international community to really restore the Gaza Strip to a place in which can really prosper, then that won't be possible. And the solution will be a military solution. Look, we are at a difficult juncture here because the dilemma that Hamas has put in front of us is a difficult dilemma. This sequestration of 250 hostages has been very painful for Israel. So we've managed to bring more than 150. We are left with 95. We are going to bring back another 32. We are going to be left with 65. We will have to decide what to do with that. It's not going to be an easy call. I don't envy our leaders. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if there is any consensus in Israel, it's a consensus that the 7th of October cannot happen again. And that's why we need to neutralize the Hamas threat in a credible way, and we need to not to allow Hamas to rearm and regroup.
I find a lot of similarities, finally, I would say, to Pakistan and Hamas. And, I keep saying to people on television, stop using the word Palestine because you need to deal with Hamas and Hezbollah. And there are many people in India who don't even consider the Hezbollah to be a terrorist group. There are people who are pro-Hamas in India as well. So to that audience, and my last and final question to you is this. First of all, I must say, Ambassador, I admire the patience of the Israeli people. Because if we had 100 hostages taken by Pakistan, even if Pakistan were a nuclear-armed country, we would have blown them to smithereens and there would be no looking back. I think Israel has been extremely patient and has been under a great deal of international pressure and has handled the situation. It's very, very, very delicately. Having said that, how do you view Pakistan? Now let me ask you a straight, direct question in our context, in the context of the battles that your country is fighting, in the context of the fact that Pakistan, despite all its economic bankruptcy and other issues, continues to harbor terrorism. How do you view the situation with Pakistan?
We see it as a threat. We think that any country that harbors terrorists constitutes a threat towards the region, towards the world, towards the state of Israel. So, of course, it's a very negative approach that we have. The question is, how we have a small blanket that is spread thin. And we are dealing mainly with immediate threats. The immediate threats that we have are around Israel. They are coming from Iran as well. At this point, I haven't seen Pakistan directly involved in the conflict with Israel. If they change their approach, we'll have to deal with that. But any country that harbors terrorists is a threat on international security and on the security of Israel.
What is your long-term or medium-term policy towards Iran now?
Well, we are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. If it wouldn't be because of Israel and our efforts, Iran would have been a nuclear weapon many decades ago. So we remain committed to that.
They're still trying.
Yes. We remain committed to that. And that means that we're investing a huge amount of resources in intelligence and in military capability to make sure that Iran will never acquire nuclear weapons. Second, we are working to destroy this ring of fire that Iran has been building around us. And we had, as I said at the beginning of our interview, a lot of success in that. But it's not over. You still have the Houthis in Yemen that are firing at Israel at will. We fired back, but they haven't changed their approach. So the challenges are mounting. Israel will always have to remain focused in prioritizing. And, we are not a country that is dealing only with survival. We are about thriving. Our economy is doing very well. The economy didn't even shrink during the war. Do you know that? It grew.
Yes.
So despite the fact that we have these threats, we've been able to flourish. We have a very good economy. We are going to have next month a huge business delegation coming to India. Israelis have rediscovered India. We saw how you've been supportive of Israel during this conflict. We admire India, and we want to do business with India. We want to deepen our partnership with India, both in the defense sector, in the food sector, in the high-tech sector. We want Indian infrastructure companies to come to Israel and build. And in order to do that, we have to stabilize the situation. We have to make sure that our achievements in the military field that have created these ceasefires that this neutralization of military threats will continue to prevail.
Yeah.
If we manage to do that, then the sky is the limit. We can continue developing our country, we can continue developing our relations with India and with everybody else.
Well, may you thrive, may you prosper, but most importantly, may you win.
Thank you.
May you win, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ambassador Reuven Azar. And for me personally, it's very, very useful to understand the mindset of the Israelis. Go back into the conversation and see for yourself how closely we are linked as countries and in our approach to terrorism. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.